Got Alex Perez here, who hosts the post-game show at the Voice of College Football. And we appreciate Alex doing that for the last two Miami seasons. And I think he's expecting better results and therefore better post-games in the future. But
yeah,
it's always entertaining, Alex, to check you and Slim and Brennan out after the game regardless.
I mean, we have fun after the game, that's for sure, even in losses, and we try not to take it too seriously because at the end of the day it's just a game. But today, this silly little game that we're fans of has me feeling a little better, especially when you reel in someone of the caliber of Cam Ward and what he's been able to accomplish over these last few years, and now bringing hopefully those accomplishments and that talent to Miami.
Yeah, and especially since it's not a situation like with recruiting where you usually have your first guy, your second guy, a bunch of fallback guys, and there's going to be 25, 30 quarterbacks that are going to come out that could turn out to be really good players. That transfer quarterback list was really deep, really good, but most of those guys off the board, just about everybody off the board. And then he was not just the number one guy, but one of the last guys. And it was pretty much assumed and reported all over the place that he was headed to the NFL, that he had made his decision. And I got to say, I was surprised, and maybe we shouldn't be as surprised because of the transfer portal and NIL, that this could be a possibility going forward. What we just haven't seen it hardly ever, that a player opts for the NFL and then gets yanked back and is able to sign with a school. So great work by Mario Cristobal and his staff.
Yeah, I mean, we were all around the holidays talking about Flipmas, and we assumed that meant flipping guys from other teams to Miami, but we never expected for Mario to actually pull off flipping someone from the NFL to Miami. But, we've seen this situation, not in football, but in basketball, where it actually happened with Miami, where star guard, after Miami's run to the Elite Eight a few years back, had declared for the draft, but then come back to school. But that's, someone coming back to the same school. It's not, so it's similar, but not exactly the same, because this is something where someone leaves and then walks back on their decision and goes in the transfer portal again. But, it's just really exciting, because when you look at this last year and everything that happened, there was a bunch of games that come to mind where we should have won if the quarterback play was just there. And it was very frustrating to witness at times, especially when at the end of the year, the guy that we were all frustrated with seemed to kind of come back to form in those last two games. You just look at the Georgia Tech game, which, we were a kneel down away. But if you just have better QB play, it doesn't come down to the kneel down. Florida State, a team that a lot of people feel like should have been in the college football playoffs. With better quarterback play, I think we win that game. But, we finally seem to have the answer. Just because it looks good on paper doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work out. We still have to see how it looks on the field. But judging off what Cam has done in the past and the stuff that Shannon Dawson likes to run, and then you look at the, not ease, but the maneuverability of the schedule this upcoming year, then we could be in for a special season.
Yeah, that's a great point. Tyler Van Dyke, the Texas A&M game comes to mind. So he faces a pretty strong defense, obviously a talented defense with one of the better fronts in college football. He gets great pass protection, and he looks great. He's throwing back shoulder throws. He's throwing NFL window type shots. They score 48 points. He's looking great. And then he just hit this midseason slump where he's looking okay for the majority of these games. If you look at his stats, he was racking up yardage, but just making those 3 or 4 mistakes a game that you just cannot make. Maybe you can make one of those, but you can't make 3 or 4 of those, and just costing them games. As you were mentioning, the Georgia Tech game, they outgained Georgia Tech. They controlled the game. They should have easily put it away. It didn't happen. And until late in the season, the last couple of games, the BC game, he played well. And as you mentioned, the bowl game, or before the bowl game, the BC game was obviously his last game. But so they need better quarterback play. And Cam Ward, 25 touchdowns, 7 picks, 66.6%. over 3,700 yards. I'm guessing, Alex, you're not watching a whole lot of Wazoo football, but ever since he's been in the mix for this spot with Miami, have you checked any of his game film out?
Yeah, and it's actually interesting you say, because I mean I mainly watch obviously Miami, like that's my team, that's the team that I cover for the post game show, and then over on Instagram with my own page. But I'm overall just a fan of college football. I mean, like for example, I was in Europe and I was up at 3 a.m. watching Washington versus Texas. You get me? Just because I love it and I enjoy watching the sport so much that, you know, I was aware of Cam Ward and I'd even caught some Washington State football. I'm not going to say I watched every game religiously, but, you know, I watched him against Wisconsin. I watched him play against Washington when they played Oregon. You know, it was it was exciting to see what he could do with the football in his hands. And then also, you know, see the fact that he could maneuver the pocket so easily in terms of his mobility. And I think that's something that's great that he's going to be bringing to Miami, because that's something we've sincerely lacked. And that's something that the quarterback room overall now is really bringing in, with not just him, but keeping Jakari Brown and bringing in Poffenbarger from Albany, another guy who has that mobility in the pocket. When you look at Tyler Van Dyke last year, he wasn't the most mobile guy to begin with, and then you throw on top of the fact that he would also sustain a lot of injuries. He had an injury that we didn't know about until almost the very end of the season. You know, and it's just finally going to be great to see a guy that really brings that mobility and the ability to create more plays, especially when he goes from having the 120th ranked offensive line in Washington State and having to sort of protect himself rather than be protected a lot of the times, and to going to somewhere where we had a top 20 rated offensive line. And sure, we're losing guys like Javion Cohen and Matt Lee, who was probably one of the best centers in the country, but you still have a guy like Francis Mauigoa. You still have another true freshman who was injured last year, but is probably going to be moving up on the depth chart in Samson Okunlola. Still a lot of talent in that O-line, and, you know, coaches with the repertoire of Alex Mirabal and Mario Cristobal. You have to imagine that factored into his decision to come to Miami when it's somewhere as proven in the trenches like that.
As soon as Cam Ward was linked with Miami, and I think this gets overplayed a bit, so I'll read Austin's question, then I'll set you up, Alex. Cam Ward opens up the playbook, but will Mario allow Shannon Dawson to do so, or will Mario's meddling not let that happen? So my thought initially about Cam Ward in Miami was, okay, from standpoint of wanting to showcase himself in big games in a program and a team that could really take a huge jump this year. Offensive line was exceptional last year. You mentioned some of the losses, but it's an offensive line built program because of how good Mario is and that emphasis. And so a lot of things added up to Cam showing up at Miami. But I did figure, and I think, again, this gets overplayed, like that Mario Cristobal just wants to play in a phone booth and just wants to be a power run team.
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth to that, but it's not like Tyler Van Dyke threw the ball that much less than all sorts of quarterbacks. I'm going to go to the metrics as soon as I turn it over to you and see how much Miami actually did throw the ball last season. I'm going to guess they were about halfway down the list of college football teams. It's not like they were throwing the ball as much as Iowa or Wisconsin. You know, they will open it up. But I do understand the concern or the question there about Cam Ward being a good fit and thriving in this offense.
Yeah, I mean, I understand it because there's that narrative around Mario where they call him like a quarterback killer. And a lot of times what they point to is just his time at Oregon, what's happening with Tyler, and then the failure to win with Justin Herbert, which I've never understood the Justin Herbert one, because they treat it as if Justin Herbert was this generational prospect he failed to win with out of high school. It's like Justin Herbert was a 3-star, and he was able to make him a top 10 pick in the NFL, and the guy threw for like 33 to 3,600 yards his last 2 years, and he won 11 games in a Rose Bowl. I've never understood that whole point. And then with Tyler last year, it's like, yeah, we saw the playbook sort of shrink a little bit, but I think more of that was so much because, like I said, Tyler's issues with his confidence and sort of the issues he had getting comfortable in the games around the midpoint of the season, which sort of caused the playbook to shrink down. But then you saw with the last two games being Louisville and Boston College that once he got that confidence back, the playbook opened up a bit more, and they were willing to take more downfield shots. So I don't really have an issue with that. And obviously they went over everything with Cam Ward and what he liked X's and O's wise. I mean, he said as much that their final conversation before he committed was an X's and O's conversation. It wasn't anything about money. It wasn't anything about NIL. And yeah, like David says in the comment, sure, Mario does like to be more of a power run team, but he does like that balance. He understands that this isn't 1957 anymore where it's 3 yards in a cloud of dust. And we've seen teams just as recently as this year in Michigan, a team built on power running and big in the trenches win. And you've also seen a team like Georgia, which is a balanced offense, win year in and year out. You know, it's a lot more fun to watch the air raids and the Mike Leaches of the world and these high flying powered offenses. But how often do they really win? Because when it comes down to it, they play these bigger and heavier teams in the trenches and they just get pushed around and bullied.
Michigan, to your point, and I watch a lot of Michigan football, but I would not have guessed to this degree. They were number 122 in the nation in pass attempts. So they were only 11 from the bottom. So they attempted less passes than just about anybody in the country. Now, Miami, on the other hand, attempted the 39th most attempts in the country.
Yeah.
So they're at 39 and there's roughly 95 teams below them. So they're throwing the ball.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, Mario does want to implement the run, and I think that's something that we all agree with needs to happen. But I don't think it's to the point where people are saying, like you said, he just wants to play in a phone booth. Like, yeah, he wants to be physical and big along the trenches. We've seen that with his recruiting. Last year, he had the top offensive line in the country. This year, in 2024, he had the top defensive line in the country in terms of recruiting. And that's something that we all love. But he also understands that you need to air the ball out. And that's shown right there in what you just said, the 39th most pass attempts in the country. We're not going to be like Texas Tech under Mike Leach where we're throwing 70 times in a game, but still.
Yeah, that is a pretty pronounced statistic there. 52nd in pass efficiency. So that's really measuring the effectiveness of the explosiveness and the efficiency of the passing game, number 52 in the country, which you want to be better than that, but it's not awful. Yeah. David Crow, we appreciate it. We pretty much answered that. Is Miami building similar to Michigan?
Yes and no.
When Josh Gaddis was here, there was certainly that thought, okay, are they going to Michigan's successful right now? And Mario seems to be in that same line with the Jim Harbaugh type in terms of what he wants to do on offense, but Josh Gaddis no longer there.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I loved watching Michigan this year because there's always just something fascinating with me in watching a team that is, they just know they're bigger and stronger than you, and they're going to run it down your throat, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And like you said, they were 122nd, you said, it in pass attempts
per game.
And they won every game doing that.
Yes, they did. In Miami, to your earlier point, I'm trying to think. Did they lose all one-score games? Rutgers, Louisville, Florida State, Georgia Tech.
I can
maybe everybody but NC State might have beaten them by more than one score. But
I know North Carolina we lost by 10.
10, yeah.
And then NC State is kind of like a bullshit 2-score loss.
Yeah.
Because that, like, they didn't even – there was a point in the second half where they didn't have more than 7 yards on offense. And it just – the wheels sort of fell off, and it ended up a 2-score game because we just couldn't keep the offense on the field, and the defense was so tired. And that's also sort of what happened with North Carolina, where they kind of beat Mario at his own game, where I think Omarion Hampton ran for over 200 yards.
Yep.
And yeah, they would just go into into tempo and would run for 6 yards, 8 yards, 12 yards, 4 yards, 5 yards, 5 yards, 4, just over and over again, and just ran it down our throats and kept their offense on the field. Coupled it with the fact that we had a few turnovers. That sort of was the result of that game. But yeah, I mean, like I said, every game was pretty much, we were in every game this year, even the ones that were more than 1-score losses. We were in those games, and they were all very winnable games. And really, outside of 2 games, which were Louisville and North Carolina, because Tyler did play well in those games, we could have won 10 games this year if we not even just elite quarterback play, just good quarterback play. With good quarterback play, you beat FSU. With good quarterback play, you demolish NC State. You again beat Georgia Tech. Like, you beat all these games. You're kind of like, how did we lose? And it could have been worse, because we could have lost to Clemson and Virginia, and then right there you're 5-7 again because of the quarterback position.
Yeah, I was just taking that in the direction of 39th in the country in pass attempts, and that wasn't because they were behind. So there's philosophy and approach, but there's also a lot of bad teams finish high in pass attempts because they're behind all the time and they're losing by multiple scores in the second half. So even if they're not passing teams, they just have to throw it, but not the case with.
I mean, if you want a prime example, just look to this last weekend in the wild card round. Dak Prescott, I think he finished with over 400 yards passing. You would not say he had a good game. No, because a lot of that came in garbage time. And, that's just to your point, where when you're down big, you throw a lot more. But we were in these games to the end. I mean, Florida State came down to the final drive where it ended on a Tyler Van Dyke interception.
Yes, it did. Falconer, appreciate you being here. Play in the free market, live in the free market. Yes, talking about the Cam Ward acquisition. Falconer coming back with Mario recruits. It has to pay off this year. Falconer, state-funded schools should be banned from NIL. Oh, that's a deep subject.
Yeah, I'm not the person to talk about that.
Yeah, I'm not ready to take that on. I do have my thoughts about how NIL could be reined in, but again, not for this show. I've talked about it other times, and I'm not saying that I'm a mastermind at NIL by any stretch. I just have a few ideas. And the first idea that some people hit me with is, well, you got to put in a salary cap. Well, you can't put in a salary cap because this is not the NFL. The NFL can do a salary cap because they're running a business. And so they can say, just like the business you may work at, they in a sense have a salary cap because they budget this much money for payroll. And so they know if our business doesn't do well next year, people aren't getting raises because this is our payroll. Or we had this amazing year, so, we can give better
more
raises.
Bonuses.
Yeah, because this is our pay. That's all the NFL's do. That's their pay.
NIL has turned into sort of a salary, but originally it was supposed to just be advertising.
Yes.
Like when I remember the first day NIL went live, a bunch of Miami players and immediately started posting like, hey, I'm branding with this water company. Hey, I'm branding with this local Miami fashion brand. That's what it was supposed to be. But now it's turned into these schools have separate collectives that are independent from the school. It's supposed to be we know it's not, but it's supposed to be independent from the school, and they're paying the players like salaries. And there's no way to regulate that because even then the NCAA the NCAA has no power. It all comes down to the conferences. That's why we're dealing with USC and all these teams going to the Big Ten, and then Texas and Oklahoma, they're moving to the SEC, and all this realignment, it's coming down to that because there's no governing body to rein it in. And it's all come down to the greed and the money of it. And that's why a lot of people say like college football has been destroyed. Which that's also another deep subject that is for a different show. But Yeah, there's really no way to like institute a salary cap with NIL specifically.
Yeah, that was my first question when all this broke loose was, okay, what is the evidence of these players reciprocating with whatever their name, image, likeness, and providing a payoff for whatever company? The first one I remember was Bo Nix had some kind of iced tea deal. That was one of the first ones.
The one that comes to mind for me is Quinn Ewers, where he went to Ohio State and they paid him $1 million and he just ran off and they can't get their money back because they paid it to him.
Yeah.
But then he transfers out and it's like, okay, see you. And now he's at Texas.
Now, I would think that one of the things that could save the bowl system, or probably wouldn't save it, but it would help, would be to tie these NIL payments into completing a college football season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but again, the NCAA nor any conference can relegate. That's going to come down to school by school. And for some kids, that might be a deal breaker because they're thinking ahead to the NFL and they're like, well, what if I don't want to play in the Bahamas Bowl or the GoDaddy.com Bowl or one of these meaningless bowl games? So it's a whole topic that people a lot smarter than us are going to have to deal with. Or, well, people that we perceive to be a lot smarter than us.
For sure. Absolutely. Well, the Miami spring football schedule was also released today and March 4th. So less than 2 months away, they'll be back on the field. So that's always fun when it's back in play and things to talk about. I don't know that the spring game has been announced, though.
No, they've just – and it wasn't even really officially announced by the school. It was more so leaked, the practices. That's why we don't really have a spring game yet. But, yeah, March 4th is the date that's going around. March 4th to April 13th with a break in the middle for spring break where the guys get off. But it should be interesting to see, all the true freshmen coming in. And, of course, the guy everyone's talking about, Cam Ward. There was talks before him, obviously, that there was going to be a QB competition. No one was expecting Poffenbarger or Jakari Brown to immediately just take the job, like just be given the job like last year with Tyler, where it's like, this is Tyler's job. There's no competition. This is Tyler's job, which I sort of expect the same thing for Cam Ward, and there will be a job for QB2, which I'm a big fan of because you look at Reese Poffenbarger, he has 2 years of eligibility left. Jakari, I believe, has 3 years still left because he burned the one last year, and he's now a redshirt freshman going into this season. Emery has 4 years left because he can still redshirt. And then you have Judd Anderson, who's the 3-star, more project quarterback coming in. So 2024 is going to obviously be the year of Cam Ward, and we'll go as far as he takes us. But then after that, it's really open. You could dip into the transfer portal again. You might lose a guy. We don't know. And that's the fluidity of college football that we live with now. But it should be interesting to see how some of these battles turn out, especially with the running back room. It seems like that's more Mark Fletcher's job to lose with the freshman season that he had. And you're also going to couple him with the fact that we have Henry Parrish returning. So this team will be bringing in a lot of depth, but it's still going to be a young team. I think I saw something where it's like 75% of the team is a redshirt sophomore or younger. So it's still going to be a young team. Don't expect this team to go on a Washington-type run where we go 14-0 and we're playing in the national title game. But like I said earlier, I'm cautiously optimistic that we can win 10 games and beat Florida and Florida State. That's what I want to see out of this year. But again, the games have to be played. And it all starts on March 4th with those first spring practices.
Got, hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly. Dick Cheese is coming in here, wants a shout out. Of course, we'll do that for you. Says, Voice of College Football, I love the show. From Singapore, can I get a shout out? There it is. Appreciate you being here, man. All the way from Singapore.
Yeah. I see Christopher Walker. He said he heard the spring game was April 12th or 13th. Well, I have the graphic here that got leaked. What's the 12th? What's the 13th? It's the final spring practice, but it's not necessarily the spring game. There hasn't really been anything announced with the spring game yet. People just saw that it was the final spring practice, and I don't know. You know how the internet works. They just ran with it, and it's a big game of telephone.
It seems to be a fairly recent trend that where the spring game always would conclude the spring season for all these teams. I've seen a number of teams actually back it up like one or two of their 15 allotted practices. And I'm guessing the reason they do that is to have the spring game and then still have a practice or two.
I think we did that last year
in the spring game and say, we want to leave a practice open so we can actually address what happened in the spring game.
Yeah, I think we actually did that last year. I don't remember fully because at this point it's like a year now, but I think so. Where we had the spring game, and then we had like one or two more practices to help iron everything out from what we saw in the spring game. Which, I mean, I'm just ready. It's only been like 2 weeks since the season's over, and I'm already ready for football to be back. I mean, the NFL is great and all, and we have the playoffs going, but there's nothing like college football. And at least those first spring practices will be a little taste, and especially now with the optimism in the fan base and everything we're seeing online with how happy people are. Everyone's going to be going crazy trying to get every little detail about everything that's going on. How's Cam looking? How's the defense looking? Who's stepping up in practice? So it should be fun, even if it's the off season.
No doubt.